You're always good with the little things." That's what Leanne said, smiling like a guest in the home I bought. No thank you for 12 years of caregiving. No mention of whose name was on the mortgage. Just the little things. But the truth is, those little things, they cost me everything. The dinners, the documents, the silence. And in the end, the house had her name on it. But not my absence. If you've ever held a family together, only to be pushed aside when it mattered most, drop a 1. If not, hold tight to those who truly see you. Drop a 0. Because sometimes the loudest betrayals are whispered, under doilies and framed brunch speeches. They didn't ask me to host the memorial dinner. They just assumed I would, like always. 3 weeks since Mom's funeral, and the smell of lemon cleaner still hadn't left the kitchen. It clung to the tile grout and the edge of the sink where the sponge sat, slowly drying to a stiff curl. I'd used the cleaner that morning too, scrubbing under the stove, even though no one would look there. I told myself it was for hygiene, but the truth was, I didn't know how else to prepare. It was a cloudy Sunday, 52 degrees, the kind of chill that made damp sweaters feel heavier. I had set out the linen napkins, the pale blue ones Mom preferred. The roast chicken was already in the oven, rosemary tucked under the skin just like she'd taught me. Not too much, just enough to suggest warmth. The suggestion was all I could manage now. Leanne hadn't come downstairs yet. She'd arrived late last night, trailing perfume and exhaustion, tossing her suitcase near the stairs with the confidence of someone returning to their rightful place. I hadn't asked her when she planned to contribute, just like I hadn't asked why the electric bill had come under her name again last month. These days, I have learned to notice quietly. The doorbell rang. I dried my hands on a towel and reached it before Leanne could make her entrance. Aunt Millie stood on the porch in a coat 2 decades too formal, holding a store-bought pie wrapped in foil. "Oh, Ellen, you've done so much," she said, stepping into the foyer like a guest instead of the woman who used to braid my hair every Sunday before Mass. "I just brought dessert. You always handle the main things." Always. Behind her came Greg. Quiet, grayer now, eyes darting to the corners of the living room, like he was checking for exits. He nodded to me, one hand in his coat pocket, the other clutching a bottle of wine. "You look well," he offered. "I look busy," I replied, forcing a smile that felt borrowed. Leanne finally appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair curled, makeup dewy, wearing that crimson silk blouse she always saved for occasions she wanted to dominate. She descended like she was greeting the press outside a gala. I watched the guests' heads tilt upward as if on cue. "Everyone's here," she called brightly. "Isn't it beautiful what Ellen's done? I swear she's basically our live-in housekeeper." The laugh came easily, smoothly, the kind of laugh that filled a room and sucked the air from your lungs. Others joined in. Aunt Millie, someone from Mom's book club, even Greg, though his chuckle died early. No one corrected her. I turned back into the kitchen. The faucet ran too hot, but I kept my hands under it anyway. I washed the measuring cup I hadn't used, then the whisk, then the spoon with only a smear of oil on it. My fingers felt rubbery, the tips pulsing slightly from the heat. I blinked once, twice. The tile blurred and sharpened again. When the timer rang, I pulled out the roast chicken. The skin was golden, crisped at the edges, just the way Mom liked it. For a moment, I imagined her standing beside me again, gently nudging my elbow. "Don't forget the time," she'd say. I opened the spice cabinet, not because I needed anything, but because I wanted to see if the note was still there. And it was. Her handwriting still slightly smudged from years of grease and steam. "Sunday is roast day. Don't forget the time." I pressed the note flat with my thumb, then closed the cabinet quietly. I didn't need to cry. Not now. Not yet. The rest of the evening passed in waves, people eating, murmuring, remembering. Leanne gave a small toast by the fireplace, lifting Mom's crystal wineglass like it had always been hers. She spoke of legacy and gratitude and how we carry Joan's light. I stayed near the kitchen, pouring more water than wine. Later, while rinsing plates, I noticed Dot across the yard, peering over her fence. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. That look, half worry, half knowing, was enough. I reached for the bottle of Merlot to refill a glass someone had left near the sink. The bottle slipped, not from sweat or slickness, but from the cold numbness settling deep in my wrists. It hit the tile and rolled, unbroken, toward the cabinet. I didn't chase it. I just stood there, palms damp, breathing through the thickness that had replaced air. Eventually, the guests trickled out with hugs and plastic-wrapped leftovers. Leanne disappeared upstairs again, calling out a quick, "Thanks for everything, sis," like a throwaway tip at a restaurant she never planned to return to. I gathered the trash, tying the bag slowly, making sure nothing leaked. When I stepped outside, the night was darker than it should have been. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching underfoot. As I lifted the bin lid, something caught my eye. An envelope on the side panel, half wedged in the mailbox I rarely used. I pulled it free. A bill. Pacific Light and Power. And there it was. That night, as I took out the trash, I noticed the electric bill in Leanne's name, on a service I've paid for 12 years. The sink was empty, but I scrubbed it anyway. Some mornings, routine is the only thing you still own. There's a kind of silence that doesn't settle. It prowls. The house was filled with that kind of quiet. Not peaceful, not empty, just on edge, like even the walls were waiting for the next declaration from Leanne. The scent of last night's roast had vanished, replaced by wind pressing against the chimney and the faint mineral tang of lemon polish. The counter was bare, the trash emptied, and still my hands moved in slow, rehearsed patterns across the basin. I didn't need to clean. I needed to move. I needed something that was mine to finish. On the dining table, beneath a vase of slightly wilted lilies, was a neat stack of thank you cards, all signed by Leanne. Not a single one mentioned me. Not even a "with Ellen's help" in passing. There had been name cards last night, printed in cursive gold. I remembered placing them just before the guests arrived. I'd used Mom's old label maker, the one with the peeling M key. I found the discarded cards in the kitchen bin. Most had been tossed, but mine, E. Staff Rourke, was crumpled into a coffee filter. I didn't cry. I folded it flat, tucked it into the edge of a drawer, and closed it softly. Some things deserved to be kept, not cherished, but remembered. Upstairs, I heard her voice. Not raised, not performing yet, just practicing. "This home," she said, pausing for breath, "is a place of renewal." A pause. "My sister helps with the details." Another pause. Then the sound of her lipstick cap snapping closed. I set the kettle to boil. As the steam rose, it mingled with the faintest scent of rosemary left on the cutting board. That smell had always meant Sunday. Mom would hum while she cooked, and we'd clip recipes together at the table. Her with her green-handled scissors, me with my bitten fingernails and glue stick. Dot knocked mid-morning, wearing her wool coat like armor against something heavier than cold. She held out a tin of cookies and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You okay, hun?" I nodded. She didn't press. Dot never did, but she looked at me the way people do when they already know the answer. After she left, I stood in the hallway holding that tin, unsure whether to open it or keep it sealed like a time capsule of someone else's good intentions. I didn't eat the cookies. I sat with the scrapbook instead. It was thicker than I remembered, patched together with peel and stick photo corners, postcards, napkins from weddings, all the artifacts of someone else's memory work. I flipped slowly, careful not to smudge anything. Pages for Leanne's graduation, her cross-country trip, her promotion. And then nothing. No photos of the two-bedroom apartment where I moved back in with Mom after her diagnosis. No pictures of her recliner. No snapshots from that Thanksgiving I cooked alone when Leanne had a thing in Maui. I flipped to the back. A sticky note clung to the cardboard. Leanne's handwriting, perfect and self-certain. Legacy isn't about credit. It's about contribution. I stared at that note longer than I meant to. My thumb brushed the edge until the glue gave way and the paper fluttered loose. Have you ever felt like the only person who remembered the truth, while everyone else edited you out? If silence has ever been your family's way of erasing you, leave a comment number 8 below. Now, let's see what came next. I remembered a time, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, when Mom and I sat at this same table on a Saturday afternoon. She had the newspaper spread out in front of her, sections folded back to the food column, her fingers smudged with newsprint and flour. I was clipping a recipe for buttermilk biscuits, the edges jagged from dull scissors, while she underlined a piece about Sunday pot roasts with her favorite green pen. We didn't talk much that day, just the occasional "pass me the tape" or "remind me to try this one soon." But the silence had been easy, familiar, loved. Later that night, I finally opened the cookie tin. Dot's handwriting was on a slip of paper taped inside the lid. "Thought you might need something sweet." I bit into one, shortbread, buttery, with just a touch of almond. It tasted like every church bake sale from my childhood. It tasted like someone still saw me. I opened my phone again, scrolled past Leanne's post. The comments piled up. "Beautiful tribute. Joan would be proud. Such strength in sisterhood." Not one mention of me. I clicked on the photo again, zoomed into the window behind the porch. You could almost see me inside, clearing plates in the background blur. Almost. But not quite. I closed the app, set the phone face down. And for the first time that day, I said out loud, I was there too. That night, Leanne posts on social media, "When strong women hold space, families heal." The photo? Our porch, without me in it. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for my birth certificate. What I found instead changed everything. It started, as most small unravelings do, with something I couldn't find. The rain had begun sometime after midnight. Not a storm, just a polite, steady tapping against the windows, as if even the weather knew to tread softly. I sat on the floor of my room in wool socks and a college sweatshirt I hadn't worn in years, surrounded by manila envelopes and the kind of dust only addicts know how to make. I told myself I was organizing. That's what I'd texted Greg when he asked how the week was going. Sorting through things, decluttering. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji, then nothing. I tried not to read into the silence. The birth certificate was supposed to be in the fireproof box, right under Medical Joan. But that section had been reorganized, labeled with Leanne's tabs, color-coded, her handwriting at the top. There was no Ellen section, just household, utilities, estate, and tucked under refinance history was a folder I didn't remember. I opened it. The application was dated 2 months before Mom's stroke, filed under both our names, mine and Leanne's. I stared at the bottom where our signatures sat neatly in tandem. Hers, fluid and ornamental. Mine. Well, it looked like mine. Except for the E. A slight loop, too tidy. The kind of curl Leanne makes when she signs birthday cards. I pulled out my driver's license and held the two side by side. It was close. Close enough for a scanner, maybe even a clerk. But I'd never made that curl. I clicked open the laptop, typed in the county records site, fingers heavy with the quiet kind of dread. A few minutes later, I had a copy of the full application. The system logged the signer as Ellen Rourke, digital signature registered via shared home IP. I sat back against the dresser, the wood pressing into my spine. The walls of the house hadn't changed, but the air inside them had. I felt the shift in my own chest. I printed the form, not to file away, but to see it on paper. I taped it to the bulletin board above my desk, centered, eye level, the way you pin evidence when you need to believe your own memory. My phone buzzed. A message from Leanne's account. An image of flowers blooming on the windowsill. "Spring energy," the caption read. I ignored it. Instead, I opened the group text with Greg and Aunt Millie, typed, "Has anyone seen changes in the deed filings lately?" Greg replied with a thumbs up again. Aunt Millie didn't answer. I closed the window and sat in silence. The heater kicked in with a low groan. I reached for my tea and found it cold. I remembered, suddenly, a moment from 2 winters ago. We were in the living room, the heater groaning in protest as the wind battered the eaves. Leanne had handed me a stack of envelopes, half sealed and scribbled with notes. "Just sign this real quick," she'd said, brushing imaginary lint from her sweater. "It's for utilities. You know how they get when names don't match accounts." I'd been tired. Mom was having one of her bad days. I'd barely glanced at the forms, just enough to see our address and some barcodes, nothing glaring. I signed where she pointed, the pen skipping over a patch of grease from her sandwich plate. Now, that same curl in the E, off by just enough to unsettle, stared at me from the refinance document. My heart pounded, not from rage, but from the realization that this had been building for years. Slowly, quietly, and with paperwork. I opened Mom's old filing box again, rifling past expired warranties and church newsletters. Near the bottom, wrapped in an old scarf, was the folder I hadn't seen in years. The tab read, "Taxes, Joan plus Ellen." Inside was a note in Mom's script, faded but still hers. "File yearly. Ellen's name only." That's when the cold tea beside me tipped, soaking through the rug. I didn't even flinch. A ping on my phone. County recorder email. "New deed application filed. Leanne Rourke, primary occupant." Dot handed me the folder like it was a pie she'd baked. Gentle, wrapped in brown paper. Warm at the edges, with something unspoken. She didn't come in through the front. Just appeared by the side door like a breeze that hadn't knocked. I was wiping down the counter, not because it was dirty, but because my hands needed a task. "Morning, hun," she said, setting the folder down between the fruit bowl and the cinnamon candle that had been burning too long. I turned, half expecting her to mention the weather or ask about leftovers. But she didn't. She just stood there, gloves in one hand, folder in the other. "She asked me to hold on to this," Dot said. "Said to give it to you if things ever turned mean." I stared at the folder, unsure whether to feel gratitude or grief. There was no label, just a crease across the center, where it had been folded once, maybe in hesitation. After Dot left, I carried the folder to the kitchen table. The same table where Mom used to balance her checkbook on Sunday afternoons. The light was slanting through the frosted window panes, landing just right on the paper, as if the house itself wanted me to read it. Inside, a notarized document. My name. My mother's signature, dated nearly 2 years ago. The language was unambiguous. This home, purchased solely under the financial contribution and maintenance of Ellen Rourke, is to remain in her possession unless otherwise explicitly contested in court. A paragraph below listed care contributions, visits, appointments, pharmacy records. There were bullet points, typed, precise. Mom had taken inventory of my years. Tucked at the back, a small envelope. My name written in pen I recognized. Her Sunday pen, the one she kept in the old teacup by the phone. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "then I wasn't brave enough while I was here." I stopped there. Let the weight of it settle. Outside, a crow landed on the porch rail. Inside, the only sound was the faint hum of the fridge and my own breathing. She had known. Not just suspected. Known. About Leanne. About the slow way I was being erased. Transaction by transaction. Smile by smile. And she had written it down. My hands trembled. Not from sadness, but from the shocking relief of not feeling crazy. Greg called 20 minutes later. "I think I found something too," he said. "In one of Mom's old folders in the garage, behind the Christmas boxes. I haven't opened it yet, but it's got your name on it." His voice was quieter than usual. Not scared, uncertain, maybe, or cautious. I thanked him. We didn't say more. I sat back at the table, the brown folder still open, the air smelling like dish soap and cinnamon, and suddenly I remembered how Mom once said, "Filing is like gardening. Everything needs a place to grow or be cut back." She'd said it while sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting receipts into a shoebox labeled "Someday." I hadn't thought much of it then, just another one of her sayings, somewhere between poetic and precise. But now, holding the folder Dot had delivered, the metaphor bloomed. She had been pruning in silence. Not out of fear, but out of deliberate care. I let the first tear fall. Then another. I wasn't sobbing, just finally releasing. Because someone, somewhere, had believed me enough to write it down. Have you ever stayed quiet to keep the peace, until someone finally showed you that your silence was never owed? If you've ever found proof that you weren't wrong after all, comment number 9 below. Now let's keep going. She said nothing for a few seconds. Just stood there, her scarf still half looped around her neck, keys dangling from one hand. Her eyes flicked to the table, then to me, then back to the folder, as if trying to assess how much I'd read. "Where'd you get that?" she asked finally, tone brittle but low. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pushed the envelope gently back into the folder, smoothing the edges with my palm like I was putting away a sacred thing. I'd expected this moment somehow, but not the strange sense of calm that came with it. "You knew," I said. "You knew she was keeping track." Leanne didn't move. "It's not what you think." That line, the evergreen anthem of the cot. I almost laughed. "She didn't want confrontation," I said quietly, "so she filed things instead. She documented everything. All the appointments, all the bills I paid, the nights I stayed home while you were on yoga retreats." Leanne shifted her weight, looking toward the kitchen sink, then back again. "You make it sound like I abandoned her." "I'm making it sound exactly like what it was." A silence grew between us, dense, immovable. "I just thought we were all doing our part," she murmured, but even she didn't seem to believe it. "She left this with Dot," I added. "Said to give it to me if things ever turned mean." Those were her words. Leanne's face twitched, barely. But it was there. We stayed like that for a moment longer, frozen in the middle of our childhood kitchen, two women with the same jawline and utterly different versions of loyalty. And then she turned, walked out of the room and up the stairs. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I turned back to the table, refolded the papers, and slipped them into a larger envelope. The notary seal glinted briefly in the afternoon sun. Upstairs, a door closed. I stayed seated, watching the light shift across the linoleum tiles. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and went silent. The cinnamon candle had burned down to a pool. I reached over, pinched the wick with 2 damp fingers, and watched the smoke curl upward. Twisting, then gone. The front door opens. Leanne walks in, sees the open folder. She freezes. Leanne smiled like a hostess, not a sister. "Mind setting out the glasses?" she asked. "You're always good with the little things." She breezed past me in a cloud of citrus perfume and synthetic calm, carrying a stack of folded doilies like they were heirlooms. I didn't answer. I just reached for the wine glasses. 6, even though I counted 8 guests. My fingers moved with the kind of grace that comes from repetition, not affection. In the coat closet, my hand brushed the envelope. Not thick, but heavy. Documents, photos, a timeline typed and notarized. I'd assembled it last night with surgical focus, rereading every line until the silence of the house became deafening. It wasn't the glasses or the brunch guests. It was the envelope in my coat pocket that made my hands sweat. By noon, the kitchen smelled of rosemary and nutmeg. The jazz playlist Leanne had curated drifted from the living room speakers, something with brushed drums and too many chords. Greg arrived without ringing the bell. He wore a navy sweater and a tired look, holding a manila folder that matched mine almost exactly. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Leanne floated among the guests with the practiced ease of someone used to being admired from a safe distance. Her hair was pinned too tightly, her voice just a touch too bright. "We're so grateful to host today," she said, standing beside the framed photo of her and Mom. The image had been cropped to exclude me. I knew the original well. "This home has always been a space for healing, and we hope to continue that legacy by opening it for women's wellness events. Mom would have loved this." A soft ripple of affirming sounds followed. "How lovely! What a tribute! So needed in these times." Leanne smiled wider, feeding off the echo. I stepped forward. No announcement, no speech. I pulled the envelope from my coat and placed it beside the pitcher of lemon water, right on top of the linen napkins she'd ironed at dawn. A corner peeked out, Mom's handwriting on the first page. Greg moved toward the table slowly, then stood beside me. He set his folder down beside mine. His hands didn't tremble. For a moment, no one noticed. Then a woman with oversized sunglasses and a business card for a podcast said, "Oh, is that for the presentation?" Leanne's eyes flicked to the table, then to us. She smiled, but it faltered. "Oh," she said, a note higher than necessary. "This must be—" Greg interrupted her softly. "You should read this before any more guests arrive." The jazz kept playing. Somewhere, a fork clinked against porcelain. Leanne reached for the envelope. Her fingers were pale against the manila. Her other hand, usually steady, touched the edge of the table for balance. The room hadn't gone silent, not entirely, but the mood had shifted. Even the candlelight seemed more alert. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I remembered the brunches Mom used to host. Just us. Quiet, no guests or speeches. She made waffles from biscuit, sliced strawberries with a paring knife she refused to replace. No doilies, just warmth. Once, she'd told me, brunch is where you breathe, not perform. I stepped back, turned toward the porch door, and opened it. Cold air met my face. I welcomed it. It struck me how far we'd drifted from those mornings. back when Mom would scribble the grocery list on napkins, flipping pancakes while humming off key to the radio. She'd pull my hair back with one of her old scrunchies and say, "If it's crooked, it's still breakfast." We didn't care then. Nothing needed curating. Everything was allowed to be soft. The last real brunch I remembered with her was after a cold snap knocked the power out. We boiled water on the grill, wrapped ourselves in throws, and ate cereal by candlelight. She jokes, "We're pioneers, but prettier." I still have that candle. The wax curled like a question mark now. That warmth didn't live in doilies or speeches. It lived in being seen, even in dim light. It lived in sharing the quiet and letting it count. And today, for the first time in weeks, the silence felt earned. I didn't know what Leanne would do next. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe she'd double down. Maybe she'd invite the guest to meditate on forgiveness while quietly pocketing the papers. But that wasn't my part to play anymore. I'd said what I came to say, without words. I breathed in the cold again. A neighbor passed by, waving with a puzzled expression. I waved back, calm. No need to explain. The truth was on the table. Not raw, not loud, but set, like brunch. Inside, I heard chairs scrape. A spoon hit the floor. The house was finally reacting, piece by piece, like it had been holding its breath too. I stayed outside a little longer, letting the cold bite through my sleeves. Not because I needed the chill, but because, for once, I had nothing left to prove. I walk out onto the porch. Behind me, I hear a glass break. There was no scene, no shouting. Just me, the kitchen, and the keys in my hand. Warm from my pocket, heavier than I remembered. The house smelled like nothing. No food, no cleaner, no perfume. Just quiet wood and old walls. The kind of silence that doesn't just come from emptiness, but from something finally exhaled. Leanne was gone. To regroup, she'd said in a note left on the fridge, as if this were a corporate setback instead of a family unspooling. She took her ring light and smoothie blender, left the candles, left the books she'd never really read. I moved through the rooms slowly, one by one. The living room still had the dent in the couch cushion from where Mom used to sit. Her tea tin was in the pantry, shoved behind Leanne's vitamin jars. I held it a moment before wrapping it in a dish towel and placing it carefully in my bag. The ledger was next, our family's finances handwritten in Mom's tiny, even script. I flipped through it gently, tracing numbers I hadn't noticed before. At the back, a small corner was folded. I opened it and found a list in Mom's handwriting. Things that matter, even when no one sees. My name was second on the list. I stood still for a long moment, the cold of the morning curling at the edges of the window glass. Outside, the branches were bare, but the air carried that peculiar clarity only January can offer. Sharp, honest, unfinished. In the hall closet, I reached up behind the stack of table linens and pulled down the quilt. The one Mom made during her chemo, in the colors of the garden we never got around to planting. I folded it over my arm, then over again, as though I was holding something living. Behind the pantry door, a note fluttered loose when I opened it. Taped long ago, the ink faded but still legible. For Ellen, when the house feels too loud. I pressed my thumb to the tape, as if touching it might take me back. But it didn't. It only brought me forward. The phone buzzed, a text from Dot. "Whatever you decide, you did good." Then a voicemail from Greg, his voice rough with mourning. "Hey, I'm in. Whatever comes next with the estate, I'm backing you." I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood there, heart slow, for once not rehearsing the next thing to say. The last thing I picked up was a photo, One of me and Mom at the farmer's market, laughing over something I've long since forgotten. I didn't frame it. I didn't need to. Some memories don't need glass to be protected. I placed the house keys on the marble tray near the sink, just where Mom used to leave grocery lists. I heard the faint clink as they landed, metal on stone, final and freeing. I stepped to the side door, the one that creaked, opened it slowly, and stood in the cold, feeling how it wrapped around my ankles, lifting the hem of my coat like an old friend. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I remember the last time Mom held my hand. We were in the hospital, the beeping machines trying to pretend time could be measured. Her fingers were cold, but her voice was steady. "Don't ever let noise make you small," she said. "You're not small. You never were." 3 days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten? Cream envelope, no return address. From a lawyer. But it wasn't addressed to Leanne. I walked to the edge of the porch and let myself sit on the top step, quilt still in my lap, arms around it like it might speak. I watched a squirrel nose through the frost-bitten lawn, moving like the world had never been broken. There was something comforting in that, the persistence of small creatures. For a while, I counted the clouds. Not out loud, just in rhythm. A practice I hadn't done since childhood, when I used to sit on the roof and wonder what college would be like, what adulthood might feel like. I never imagined it would feel like this. A kind of quiet rupture that doesn't wound so much as reveal. The house behind me no longer felt like mine. But then again, maybe it never fully was. I had kept it functioning. Fed it, cleaned it, kept the lights on. But Leanne had always known how to perform ownership, even if she never earned it. I was the ghost in my own home. Until now, ownership, I was learning, had less to do with deeds and more to do with memory. Who remembered the way the kitchen smelled during apple season? Who knew which cupboard creaked, which drawer stuck, which window needed a sheen to close? Those were the things I carried. Not furniture, not fixtures, feeling. I don't know what the letter will say. It might be another summons, or an apology from someone else who stayed silent too long. But it has my name on it, just mine. That's enough for now. I stood, finally. Let the chill do its work. I walked down the steps, quilt tucked under my arm, and didn't turn around. If the house needed anything else, it would have to ask. I had already answered. Somewhere inside, the heat clicked on. The old system groaned. But out here, in the still January morning, I felt nothing but peace. And for the first time, I didn't need the house to hold me. I was already home. The house no longer holds me, and yet I carry it with me, in scent, in silence, in the weight of keys I no longer need. What I lost wasn't just space or title. It was the illusion that love always comes with recognition. I've come to believe that family, like old wallpaper, often hides its flaws behind patterns we're taught not to question. But when the light hits just right, you see the seams, and that seeing is its own kind of freedom. Not every bond is meant to be repaired. Some are meant to be understood and then let go. If this story echoes anything in your own life, perhaps pause a moment. Remember the quiet ones, the steady hands, the truths that never made it into the scrapbook.